All right, guys, so today we are going to be talking about the long, extensive process that was the birth and the building of the Twin Towers. This was around a 20-year process that started all the way back in the 1940s, believe it or not. Of course, the towers not even theorized until the late 50s, and then the actual model came out in 1964. But going all the way back to 1946, a year after World War II had formally ended, New York State passed a bill that called for a, quote, World Trade Center to be established. This trade center would increase New York City's role in transatlantic trade. The World Trade Corporation was founded, and a board was appointed by New York City Governor at the time, Thomas E. Dewey, to develop plans for the project. And believe it or not, that was the initial drawing when it came to the World Trade Center complex. Obviously, no Twin Towers. That ended up happening later, but you can kind of see the building design of the potential complex that they theorized in the late 40s and early 1950s. You can see via this aerial map, the original proposed site was actually along the East River, the final site, and where both the Twin Towers stood, right along the Hudson River. That was the final chosen area, and that is the original model of the entire World Trade Center complex that was revealed in 1964 by the lead architect Minoru Yamasaki. You can see the design, not only the Twin Towers, but also the buildings surrounding it. They kind of get left out when it comes to the whole 9/11 event. And this is a good just thing from Wikipedia. It gives pretty much the big summary of the timeline, the groundbreaking happening in August of 1966. The construction starts on One World Trade Center. Now, One World Trade Center was the North Tower. It was taller than the South World Trade Center, despite it being identical. The reason it was taller was because, of course, of the antenna. And if you ever have trouble determining north versus south, the antenna is the easiest way. The north was always bigger, and it started construction first in August of 1968. So it had a little bit of a head start on the south. You can see Two World Trade Center, which was the South Twin Tower, starting in January of 1969. So about 4 months after the North Tower had started construction. And then you can see actually Six World Trade Center started construction in 1969 as well. That was the next one to be built. Five World Trade Center in 1970, Four World Trade Center in 1974, and then you did have the original hotel, which was not a Marriott. It was a Visa International Hotel, going up in 1979. They ended up rebranding, and the Marriott certainly played a role when it comes to 9/11. I've done an extensive review, or I wouldn't call it an extensive review, but I've done a review on it. Basically, it split in half when the South Tower fell, and then it was completely destroyed outside of one of its corners when the North Tower came down in regards to 9/11. And you can see when they were topped out. So the One World Trade Center topped out just before Christmas of 1970. So a build time a little bit over 2 years for the North Tower, and then the South Tower going up in July of 71. And One World Trade Center was officially opened in 1970, with Two World Trade Center opening in January of 72. So about a year apart in terms of the North and the South Tower, with the North opening first. The entire complex with all 7 buildings was officially completed in May of 1987. One of the major limiting factors in the building's designs were the elevators. As the building got taller, more elevators were needed to service the building, which required more elevator banks that in turn took up space. The architects and engineers decided to use a new system that included sky lobbies, which are floors where people can switch from a large capacity express elevator, which goes only to 6 sky lobbies, to a local elevator that goes to each floor in a section. Thus, the local elevators can be stacked within the same elevator shaft, located on the 44th and 78th floors in each tower. The sky lobbies enable the elevators to be used efficiently, while also increasing the amount of usable space for each floor from 62 to 75% by reducing the number of required elevator shafts. The World Trade Center towers were the second super tall buildings to use sky lobbies after the John Hancock Center in Chicago. The system was inspired by the New York City subway originally. The initial Twin Towers World Trade Center complex design was unveiled in January of 1964, with an 8-foot model. The towers had a square plan, approximately 207 feet in dimension on each side. The buildings were designed with narrow office windows, only 18 inches wide, which reflected on the lead architect's fear of heights and the desire to make building occupants feel more secure. The windows only covered 30% of the building's exteriors, making them look like solid metal slabs from a distance. And yes, so that is a huge part, and that's like the main design when it comes to the World Trade Center, the Twin Towers, and something we would never see today. So the windows only covered 30% of the building. Of course, when you look at One World Trade Center, the new One World Trade Center I'm talking about, it's all windows and it's only windows. That's part of the idea. We've theorized if the Twin Towers were still up today, they would probably be very obsolete at this point based on their design, based on the lack of windows, really looking like metal slabs in the sky. But the idea of the Twin Towers and the reason they could get away with them being so simplistic is because it's very rare and unique just in and of itself to have two massive skyscrapers that are identical located right next to each other. That's one of the fascinating things about the Twin Towers and really why they built the design in the way that they did. And you can see the open floor plan with the core columns in the middle. Now, I've talked about the core columns several different times. The core columns actually did stay up when the building collapsed about 10 to 15 seconds after both the North and South Tower core columns did stay up, and the core columns housed mainly the elevator shafts along with a few bathrooms and some other storage areas. During the design process, wind tunnel tests were done at Colorado State University and at the National Physical Laboratory in the UK to establish design wind pressures that the World Trade Center towers could be subjected to and the structural response to those forces. The experiments were done to evaluate how much sway occupants could tolerate, and when both the North and the South Tower were impacted by the planes, they both did sway significantly, and that is a design feature of both of the buildings. So there are stabilized images of both towers, actually, there's only stabilized images, I believe, of the second plane impact into the South Tower. But yes, it sways back and forth, and it's designed to move with the wind gusts. And obviously, it wasn't designed to withstand something like that, but heavy things. They also did talk about a potential aircraft impact because these are massive skyscrapers in New York City. The structural engineers on the project also considered the possibility that an aircraft could crash into the building. In July of 1945, a B-25 bomber that was lost in fog had crashed into the 78th and 79th floors of the Empire State Building. A year later, another airplane crashed into the 40 Wall Street building, and there were other close calls at the Empire State Building. The architects considered the scenario of a potential impact of a jet airliner, the Boeing 707, which might be lost in fog seeking to land at JFK or Newark airports. So they were wary of a potential impact to the Twin Towers via an aircraft, but they thought the only real way that could happen would be through an airliner lost in fog or something, not traveling, 480, 520 miles per hour. And when it comes to renovations within the Twin Towers, over time, numerous structural modifications were made to suit the needs of tenants in the Twin Towers. Some steel beams in the core were reinforced and strengthened to accommodate heavy lift loads, such as large amounts of heavy files that tenants had on their floors. Repairs to structural elements on the lower level of One World Trade Center were made following the 1993 bombing. The greatest damage occurred on levels B1 and B2, with significant structural damage also on level B3. And then there also is the potential World Trade Center complex renovation that never happened, renovating the entire plaza, adding some type of overhang combined with steel cables that would have connected to both the Twin Towers. That would have been built in the 1990s, but of course it never ended up going up. But either way, guys, that is the original design process of the Twin Towers. The most interesting thing, another fun fact, they actually had to build something. They built such a massive foundation. It was nicknamed the bathtub because it was so huge, because the complex needed such a massive area, dug out really low, considering they needed to support both of these massive skyscrapers in the financial district of New York City. But either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.